Hello guys, welcome back here to the channel Tapa Olho Azul in Super Acadêmico, and today I'm going to do the reading, the commenting of the book Objectivity, Relativism and Truth, Philosophical Papers, Volume 1 by Richard Rorty. So, before I begin, please subscribe to both channels, give the like to the video, comments and share the video, help us grow as channels in the YouTube. So, Richard Rorty, I think in the channel, in the Portuguese videos, there are two or maybe one video about Richard Rorty. Richard Rorty is was an American philosopher that lived most of the 20th century. He is the one representative of the pragmatism movements. And it's a line of philosophy where the philosopher treats the problems, the questions, the issues in a very particular way that was created, that was invented in the United States by the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. It was very well launched, very well developed by another thinker, another philosopher and psychologist, William James, and has there is other philosophers. John Dewey was also one of them. He's famous because of his work in the librarian accounting. I don't know the term, but he's famous because of the Dewey Decimal System that classifies the books in the libraries. So Richard Rorty was a later example of this line of thinking, the pragmatism. He died very short time. I don't know, 10 years ago. I'm not sure, but he left us a very important work that I will comment this book specifically, Objectivism, Relativism and Truth, because it's one that I read completely, and it was by him. It wasn't something that I read about his work, but it was his work actually. So in this work is a collection of papers that explores the implications of philosophical pragmatism in several areas, including natural science, mind and body issues in philosophy, mind-body issues in philosophy, and perspectives on liberal democracy and social change. Similarities between Rorty's pragmatism and Skinner's radical behaviorism are explored in each of these three areas, although some important and interesting differences are found regarding the role of science in social change. Most areas show remarkable similarities between the two systematic perspectives. So, commenting this opening of the book, the theme of the main theme of the book. The book is made by several papers, different papers that were written in different times, in different periods, but addresses some of the most important issues for the American philosophy. That's why the one thing that's very interesting in the pragmatism is that basically the pragmatism is the philosophy where the mind, the effort of the thinker, of the philosopher, is put into arrange thought in a way that assists the living reality. That's why it's pragmatism, and it has to do with the practice of the everyday life of every citizen, of every person. So when he addresses about the natural sciences, the consequences of sciences to democracy, the social change about liberal democracy, the theme that we have today, the threat to democracy because of the reascend of far right movements. All these kind of things are very natural, very easy to be treated by a pragmatism point of view. So it's very interesting to uh, to think about these themes, these issues, in a pragmatism, not pragmatic, simple is pragmatism. It in a philosophical way. That's what Rorty does in his book. Continuing, also one commentary about the Skinner's radical behaviors. Skinner's B.F. Skinner was a psychologist, very famous because of his theories about the behavior, our behavior that's are conducted by the series of stimuli that we have in life that makes us respond in a certain way. And it was believed by the behaviorism that it was possible to train and to make someone, especially children, to behave in a certain way if you have the correct stimuli. So just a note about who is Skinner. I always try to clarify the names that are mentioned, if I know it, of course, if I is of my knowledge. Acknowledgements, introduction. Anti-representationalism. Anti-representationalism. So the idea is representation is where you have the representation of the reality in your mind. So anti-representationalism is the line of work that says that the reality has its own thing, his own language, his own existence. Ethnocentrism, that's a line of thinking that comes from anthropology, that says that we have the tendency of cultural centralism, ethnocentrism, cultural sentiment in our own culture, and the liberalism. Liberalism has two identification, two line of thinking. There's the liberalism in the economy. It is like the basis of capitalism, and the liberalism in politics that is about the liberties, the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of vote, freedom of electing, this kind of thinking. Part 1, Solidarity or Objectivity. These are the titles, the contents of the book. 1, Science as Solidarity. He speaks, as I recall, about how the ascending of science, the way that science grows in our society, may need some kind of moral work together with the hard science. I think it's a good thing to think, because sometimes science, when it's just hard, we have the movie Oppenheimer that's coming out these days. Today is August 3rd of 2023, and this movie shows about how science can create something that is really bad and destructive. And 2, is natural science a natural kind? The question. Natural science, natural kind. 3, pragmatism without methods. It's strange because methodology is a thing of science, not of philosophy. In philosophy, what we call methods sometimes is more like the philosopher point of view. In pragmatism, it's not different. There's pragmatism without method. Texts and lumps. I don't remember this. What is about text and lumps? Probably some kind of influence of language. 5, inquiry as recontextualization, an anti-dualist account of interpretation. Part 2, non-reductive physicalism. and 5, pragmatism, Davidson, and truth. This is very interesting because Davidson was also, I think he's died too, a philosopher of the same line of thinking of Rorty, but he had some connection with the philosopher language philosopher, and he has a very interesting contribution about how we deal with reality through language, to the symbolic, to the symbols of language. So pragmatism, Davidson, and truth. What is truth? If not what we interpret about reality. Representation, social practice, and truth. Then again, we have the possibility of constructing a truth in the social relations. That's why the Davidson works and another thinker, Quine, are very interesting about how do we understand the relation that we have with other people around us when we are trying to interpret the reality. This is a thing to think about. The people that surround us help us to understand the reality that we have in hand. We are not alone in this. So the truth is constructed socially. Again, Unfamiliar Noises, Hess and Davidson, a metaphor on metaphor. He was very fond of the way that metaphors becomes current in our language, in English language, in Portuguese also, but in any language, I think. Sometimes you use a metaphor in the beginning of the thinking of something, and then it becomes the normal, the regular, the common way of thinking. It lets the metaphor behind. It was just a ladder to get to the knowledge. Part 3, the priority of democracy to philosophy. This is a central place, a central theme in American pragmatism, because they value a lot this thing of the affirmation, the belief in the democracy that lets the philosophy goes. I think there are a lot of things to criticize on the American democracy and the United States democracy, or whole America, United States democracy. But one thing that's very, very clear for us that are outside is that they value very much the work of the philosophers, of the thinkers, of the scientists in the university, in the environments of the production of knowledge. And that's something positive, because even when you have some political ideology or positioning that is against the government, against the system, even so they value the existence of that. So this is the basis of this democracy in the philosophy, in the academic, in the university, and that's a very important thing to protect in this way of thinking that gave origin to the pragmatism, and has continued to be a part of democracy, of pragmatism, is that value of democracy to the philosophy. Last topics: postmodernists, bourgeois, the postmodernists, bourgeois liberalism. Postmodernist, bourgeois liberalism. On ethnocentrism, a reply to Clifford Geertz. Clifford Geertz was an anthropologist, American anthropologist, that was he liked to drive the interpretation of cultures in a way very, very particular, and I think that if I remember this topic is when Rorty addresses to the way that Clifford Geertz talks about ethnocentrism in a way that the ethnocentrism does not deny the way that the society, the prior society, the prime society of the thinker works. Sometimes the anthropologist tends to deny, in a way, his own culture to impose the interpretation of the other culture. I think something like that, if I remember correctly. If I don't, and you know, someone know, please put in the comments so we can learn from my mistakes. Cosmopolitanism without emancipation, a response to Jean François Lyotard's Index of Names. Lyotard was a French thinker that I don't know very much. I just know that he's from the same generation of Michel Foucault, um, and Jacques Lacan, and some others I don't remember now. It's called the 68 generation, the generation of thinkers that was like a very much into the deconstruction of the modern, of the modern way of thinking, of the traditional way of thinking from the modern times, something like that. I don't remember very much about. I just know saying to you the context. So this is those are the contents. Since the publication of his work, Rorty in 79, Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature, Richard Rorty has become increasingly known and influential, far beyond the walls of American analytical philosophy, of which he was a great exponent until then. In fact, from the moment on, he radically distanced himself from the analytical mainstream, becoming one of its most destructive critics, and even abandoned his coveted position as professor of philosophy at Princeton. I didn't know that. I'm reading. I didn't know that. Abandoned his position, changing it shortly after later, at the invitation of E.D. Hirsch Jr. by a professor of humanities at the University of Virginia. In this, where he remained for 16 years, Rorty began to publish texts that were increasingly closer to the tradition of continental philosophy. Continental means Europe, and from Germany mostly, in France, but this is what is continental philosophy means. He was a friend of Jürgen Habermas. There's a book about a debate of the two of them, Rorty and Habermas, that I have a video here in the channel, super academic, but in Portuguese. If you're interested, you may take a look. Taking as a theme, especially Nietzsche, Heidegger, Derrida, I forgot Derrida was of the generation, Foucault and Habermas, but also the work of novelists such as Proust, Nabokov, and Orwell, thus fulfilling the functions of which he was hired, but especially in the 1990s, he began to write about what he called cultural politics, try to articulate and make explicit his views on politics, as well as relating them to different areas of culture. During the 1990s, of course, Rorty became much more explicit and direct about his political views. He engaged in what he called cultural politics. Rorty's philosophy of education is made explicit in this phase of his work, in which, as with other areas of culture, the question of the relationship between philosophy and education is very important, is seen through the prism of its usefulness for cultural policy. The more philosophy interacts with other human activities, not just natural science but also education, art, literature, religion, and politics, the more relevant to culture policy it becomes, and therefore the more useful. I think this video is too long, 21 minutes. Even so, Richard Rorty, philosophy of education, is a problematic expression for at least three reasons. One, it is unsystematic because there is no work or a significant set of texts in which he has made his philosophical ideas explicit about education. Two, he is inaccurate because this topic always ends up mixing with his political views. He was basically a left-wing liberal, as I say, so it must interfere with his thinking. It must have interfered, of course. He's already passed away. It seems little relevant to him due to the lack of enthusiasm he manifested for the connection between philosophy on the other hand, and on one hand, and education and politics on the other, or rather, for what philosophy as a discipline or area of knowledge should do in relation to both. This is a quotation from him. A quotation from him. I am someone who has doubts about the relevance of philosophy to education, for the same reason that I have doubts about the relevance of philosophy to politics. Of course, he was, I think, being ironic. It's very important. It's very important philosophy to education, into politics. To get around these three difficulties, it will be necessary to adopt the following strategies. First, despite the dispersion and lack of systematicity in his thematization of the issue of education, it is possible to obtain a reasonable outline of his ideas about its through a careful reading of his small instructive text, Education as Socialization and Individualization. Seems to be interesting. This title is very interesting. I haven't read that. Using experts scattered elsewhere to complete it. Second, it will be necessary not to take his unusual mix between education, politics, and cultural policy as a theoretical demerit, as a lack of precision and rigor, but as an intentional strategy adopted by him to remove philosophy from its academic enclosure, so that his philosophical treatment of education would have an impact on cultural policy, that is, be useful. Third, it will be considered that Rorty's doubts about the relevance of philosophy to politics and education stem only from his discredits for the way in which the philosophical tradition on the right and the left of the political spectrum dealt with such questions until recently. That is, relating truth and freedom with a supposed human essence, which would be realized as soon as education adequately it seems like in Portuguese, adequately fulfilled its role. In both accounts of the subjects, the original rightists and the inverted leftists, there is a natural connection between truth and freedom. In both accounts of the subject, the original rightists and the inverted leftists, there is a natural connection between truth and freedom. Both accept the identification of truth and freedom with the essentially human. Freedom with essentially human. And he's saying that's the problem of leftists and rightists, that they see this essence as something that's prior to human existence. I understood that way. As myself, as existentialist, I believe that existence comes before. I can't accept that as a statement. Finally, he says, it is this metaphysical treatment of the question that intends to abandon, with his own and allegedly useful thematization, for the thinks that there is no such thing as human nature, nor is there such a thing as the alienation of one's essential humanity, due to social repression in the profound sense made familiar by Rousseau and the Marxists. The achievements of the objective of this article, which is to examine the two critical lines that accuse Rorty, respectively, of being conservative and elitist, to show that they are wrong when applied to his ideas of educating citizens in a liberal democracy. As I said before, liberal democracy is something very important to Rortys and most pragmatists. In the case of the first criticism, that of conservatism, it will be shown how an education focused on the production of a reformist rhetoric, as true by Rorty, can do more for democratic values, including not only freedom but also equality. So this is a new review. I think the videos got too long. Maybe I'll divide it in two parts just to preserve you, not tire you. But I think it was important to develop the main ideas that Rorty develops in his books, in this book specifically, mostly, but in his work in a whole. Objetivism, Relativism, and Truth, philosophical papers. It's a volume 1. I never got the volume 2 or else. I don't know if there is such a thing. Probably there is. I think there is. But I recommend that if you got interested with the ideas of Richard Rorty, you get to research and search for more information about him in your language, Portuguese or English, whatever. And I hope you enjoy. And please subscribe to both channels, help the channels to grow. And comments, give us comments about what we discussed here today in this video. Share the video and we see each other. Give the like, subscribe, like. And I see you, you see me. We see each other in the next video. Bye bye.